Hello and welcome to today's lesson. I'm your hard-working but indefatigable teacher, Mr. Burton. You will need to watch this video and take notes as you go. You may need to watch certain parts of the video a few times to ensure complete understanding. This is your homework and I will check your notes tomorrow before we get started. I hope you learned something.
Okay, hello and welcome to today's lesson, consumer demand. Demand and supply are the two big topics in microeconomics. To understand microeconomics, you must understand demand and supply and how these two interact. Let's get started.
Before we go on to understand demand and supply, let's see what makes up a market, specifically a competitive market. First, we need to have buyers, then sellers. In a competitive market, we have lots of buyers buying the same thing and lots of sellers selling the same thing. Let's assume that we're all selfish bastards. We only care about ourselves and our own gains. How do we as buyers think? We have limited budgets, so we want the best bargains to stretch our dollar. At $2, one apple is enough. But if the price drops to $1, we'll get more apples, perhaps 3. Suppose we are sellers. How do we maximize our gains? Fertilizers, labor, and land all cost money. Better sell these apples at the highest price possible. At low prices, we'll say, forget it, man. At high prices, say at $4, we'll rush to sell as many apples as possible. So how do buyers really think? If you like this video, remember to
Okay, a key point here is a market. The definition for a market is any arrangement that allows buyers and sellers of goods and services and resources to be linked together and exchanging. And competitive markets are markets composed of large numbers of sellers and buyers, and they're all acting independently, so that not a single individual seller or a small group of sellers has the ability to control the price of the products sold. Here, market prices are determined by the forces of supply and demand. And a free market,
60-second adventures in economics. Number 1, the invisible hand. An economy is a tricky thing to control, and governments are always trying to figure out how to do it. Back in 1776, economist Adam Smith shocked everyone by saying that what governments should actually do is just leave people alone to buy and sell freely among themselves. He suggested that if they just leave self-interested traders to compete with one another, markets are guided to positive outcomes as if by an invisible hand. If someone charges less than you, customers will buy from them instead. So you have to lower the price or offer something better. Whenever enough people demand something, they will be supplied by the market, like spoilt children, only in this case everyone's happy. Later free marketeers, like Austrian economist Friedrich Hayek, argued that this hands-off approach actually works better than any kind of central plan. But the problem is economies can take a long time to reach their equilibrium and may even stall along the way. And in the meantime, people can get a little frustrated, which is why governments usually end up taking things into their own more visible hands instead.
So a competitive market is a market with lots of individual and independent buyers and sellers, and a free market is a market without any government intervention. There are no rules, regulations, sales taxes, subsidies, etc., etc. The government is completely out of the market. Now, demand. Demand, the definition, is the quantity of a good or service that a consumer is willing and able to buy at a range of prices. And quantity demanded, and this is quite different from demand, is the amount of a good or service that a consumer is willing and able to purchase at a given price within a certain time period. A given price. The law of demand, and you will be tested on this, guarantee it, the law of demand says that as the price of a good or service increases, the quantity demanded decreases, and vice versa for a decrease in price, assuming ceteris paribus. Ceteris paribus, a Latin phrase meaning other things being equal. So it's used, it's reminded that all other variables other than the ones being studied, which is price, stay the same. They're assumed to be constant. The law of demand.
The law of demand is one of the most fundamental principles in microeconomics. It's all about how price affects demand. According to the law of demand, for all other things remaining constant, the lower the price of a good or service, the higher the demand will be. Conversely, the higher the price, the lower the demand. If you were to graph this relationship with the quantity demanded on the x-axis and the price on the y-axis, the relationship between price and demand would be a downward sloping curve from left to right. This line is referred to as a demand curve. Movement along the demand curve shows demand expanding or demand contracting. The people of Lone Land are willing to pay $1,000 for a computer when there are 2,000 computers in the market. However, if the price falls to $500, Lone Land people will demand 3,000 computers. This is an example of a change in the demand curve where price is the only variable affecting quantity demanded, or vice versa. In real life, things other than price can affect demand, including income in the economy, price changes in competitive goods, and swings in consumer preferences. This type of change in demand is called a shift of the demand curve. Imagine the island of Lone Land just discovered a huge reserve of oil underground, and now all of its citizens are considerably richer. In this case, the demand curve for computers would actually shift upwards, since their incomes increase. Demand curves shift based on external factors, rather than the quantity demanded or the price.
The demand schedule, our definition, a table that lists the quantity of a good a consumer is willing and able to buy at a range of different prices, and we can take this information and use it to construct the individual's demand curve. Let's assume that there are 5 consumers in a given market. Now if we go and take each of those consumers' individual demands at the range of different prices, and we can sum them up to determine the market demand. So for example, at the price of $1, we'll add consumer A, consumer B, right through to consumer E, all of those individual demands at $1, and the market demand at a $1 price is 560. That's assuming that 5 consumers make up the entire market. And we can see that at $5 the demand is considerably less. The quantity demanded is considerably less. Consumer A 50, consumer B 60, right through to consumer E only demanding 40 units at $5, giving a total market demand, adding them up, 50 plus 60 plus 10 plus 120 plus 40 equals 280, giving us a market demand at $5. The individual demand schedule for consumer A. The market demand is the sum of all individual consumer demand in the market for a good or service. So we're talking A plus B, consumer A plus B plus C plus D plus consumer E. Right, so let's take a range of prices. All the different consumers in the market, in this case Jane, individual demand schedule for Jane. Emma's in the market as well. Here's what she demands at each and every price. Kate, here's what she demands. Penny, here's what she demands across those prices. Lily, across the different prices. And if we sum all these, this is called horizontal summation, we're summing across, that will give us a market demand at each price. 3 plus 6 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2 equals 15. 15 is the market demand at $3. 10 is the market demand at $4. And only 5 units are demanded at $5. So if we take that information, we find our market demand schedule. The total sum of individual demand in each market, not in each market, at each price. Now, taking our demand schedules, we can construct a demand curve. Now, demand curve represents the relationship between price and quantity demanded, assuming everything remains equal. So if we take that information given in our demand schedule, plot it, price on the y-axis, units demanded on the x-axis,
when you talk about demand, what comes to mind first is markets. A market is the platform that brings together buyers of different sorts and sellers of different sorts. They are the demanders and the suppliers in any situation that involves a potential exchange of goods and cash. The corner gas station, an e-commerce site, the local music store, a farmer's roadside stand. These are all markets familiar to us all. Now, let's go on to examine what demand is. Demand is a schedule or a curve that shows the quantities of a product that are purchased at various possible prices, other things equal. It shows you the pattern that a consumer follows when he is willing and able to purchase various amounts of a product at each of a series of possible prices during a specified period of time. Let's consider this hypothetical demand schedule for a single consumer purchasing bushels of corn. This table shows how the various prices of corn and the quantity of corn a particular consumer would be willing and able to purchase at each of these prices are related. At $5 per bushel, the consumer is willing and able to buy 10 bushels per week, but at $4, the consumer is willing and able to buy as many as 20 bushels per week, and so forth. Thus, demand is simply a statement of a buyer's intentions with respect to the purchase of a product. Let's represent the relationship between the price of corn and an individual's demand for this corn on a simple graph. Let's measure quantity demanded on the horizontal axis and price on the vertical axis. Let's plot and connect the 5 price quantity data points listed in the table with a smooth curve, labeled D. This curve is what we call a demand curve. Its downward slope reflects an inverse relationship that economists call the law of demand. So, what we understand is that, other things equal, consumers will buy more of a product as its price declines and less of it as its price rises. Having come to this conclusion, we must now ask ourselves another question. Why is there an inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded? Actually, the law of demand is consistent with common sense. People do tend to buy more of something when it's priced low rather than when it's priced high. That's why there is always a rush at clearance sales. It's ample evidence of the law of demand. Buying depends on one more thing, and that's utility. It's been noted that in any specific time period, a buyer derives less satisfaction from each successive unit of the product that he consumes. This satisfaction can be termed marginal utility. Because successive units yield less and less marginal utility, he will buy additional units if only the price of those units is progressively reduced. We see, therefore, that consumption is subject to diminishing marginal utility. For example, a decline in the price of chicken will increase the purchasing power of consumer incomes, enabling people to buy more chicken. This is the income effect that price decline has on demand. At a lower price, chicken is relatively more attractive, and consumers tend to substitute it for pork, lamb, beef, and fish. This is the substitution effect that price decline has on demand. Income and substitution effects combine to make consumers able and willing to buy more of a product at a low price than at a high price. It thus becomes clear how price and quantity demanded are inversely related.
demand curves, let's have a look at our demand schedule. What we're doing now is we have price on the y-axis, quantity demanded on the x-axis, and all we are doing is going through and plotting each data point. So 5 units are demanded at $5, 10 is a quantity demanded at $4, 15 is quantity demanded at $3, 20 the quantity demanded at $2, 25 at $1, and we join those points together, we have our demand curve. Simple. Now we need to be able to represent a change in price along our demand curve, because this is exactly what the law of demand tells us is going to happen. So at initial starting price of $3, 15 units are the quantity demanded. Now if there is a price increase, we know that the quantity demanded is going to decrease. So if the price increases from $3 to $5, in this instance the quantity demanded is going to decrease from 15 units down to 5 units. As price increases, the quantity demanded decreases, exactly as the law of demand states that it would. And a change in price is represented by a movement along the demand curve. A movement along the demand curve, not a shift of the demand curve. In a similar fashion, if we get a decrease in price, and we got an initial starting price of $3 here, decrease in price to $1, we can see that the quantity demanded increases from 15 units to 25 units. Again, it's a movement along the demand curve represented by that green arrow there. And as price decreases, quantity demanded increases, exactly as stated in the law of demand. Now, determinants of demand, these are things that will shift demand itself, will increase demand or decrease demand. We're not talking quantity demanded, we're talking increases or decreases in demand. We're talking shifts of the demand curve and not a movement along the demand curve. There are 4 factors that determine demand and this increase or decrease demand, and these are income, preferences, taste and fashion, the price of related goods, and demographic changes. There are others, and you might see others mentioned, but these are the main ones. Income. Now we have normal goods and we have inferior goods. Normal goods are goods and services for which demand increases as consumer incomes increase, and for which demand goes down when incomes drop. Examples would include cars and holidays. So normal goods, as income increases, demand also increases, and as demand decreases, and as incomes decrease, demand also decreases. So as income increases, demand for a good increases, more is demanded at each and every price, and the demand curve shifts up and to the right. Now inferior goods are those goods and services which we don't really like to buy. We buy because we have to. Examples include used cars. We don't really want to buy a used car, we'd much prefer a new car, but new cars are far more expensive. Cheaper cuts of meat is another classic example. Now demand for inferior goods decrease when incomes increase. So incomes increasing, demand for these types of goods, used cars, will decrease, and if incomes decrease, demand for these types of goods, inferior goods, will increase. So as incomes drop, we're much more likely to buy a used car instead of a new car, an inferior good. Now as income increases, demand for an inferior good decreases, less is demanded at each price, and the demand curve shifts down and to the left. An important distinction: normal goods and inferior goods. Our second one, preferences, taste and fashion. Now as goods and services become more desirable, demand obviously grows, and as demand grows, the demand curve moves up and right to indicate that quantity demanded also increases at each price. And the converse of this is when a good gets to be less desirable, demand declines. And this makes sense, right? If something goes out of fashion, people buy less of it, demand decreases. Price of related goods. Now we've got two types of goods here. The first is substitutes. Now substitute goods are products you can use instead of a different good. And the classic example is Coke and Pepsi. They're substitute, direct substitutes to each other. They directly compete against each other. Other examples would be petrol and public bus rides. Now a rise in the price of petrol results in the rise in quantity demanded of bus rides at each price, and the demand curve for bus rides moves up and right. So here we go. An increase in the price of Coke leads to a decrease in the quantity demanded for Coke. And if people are buying less Coke, then they're far more likely to be buying Pepsi. So as less Coke is purchased, there's an increase in demand for Pepsi, the substitute good. Complements are our other related good that we look at. Now complements are products that are used and consumed with each other, and the classic example here are smartphones and apps. There's no way you'd be buying an app if you didn't have a smartphone. So once the cost of smartphone falls, the quantity demanded of this good increases, coming from the law of demand. And as more cell phones are bought and sold and consumed, extra apps are then obviously bought and sold and consumed. So the demand for apps increases as the price of smartphones decreases. Here we go. We've got a decrease in the price for smartphones. The quantity demanded increases. So there are more cell phones in the market being used by consumers, and as more cell phones are being used by consumers, then obviously more apps are going to be purchased. So as more smartphones are purchased, there's an increase in demand for apps, and apps are the complement good. Remember, smartphones and apps are being used and consumed together. Demographic changes. Demographic changes, these are variations in groups of the population. So we're talking size, age, proportion of women in the workforce. So in many Western economies, New Zealand included, the US, Europe, the size is pretty stable. Ages are increasing. We are getting older, and the proportion of women in the workforce has continued to grow since about the 1960s, 70s. So as the population grows, quantity demanded for the majority of products rises at each price, and the demand curve shifts up and to the right. So an example here is that as more women took to the workforce, fewer women stayed at home, then the demand for childcare services increased. And that is an example of a demographic change driving a change in demand. So demographic change, less women in the household, more women in the workforce, and increased demand for childcare services to support those women in the workforce. Now changes in demand are shown by a change, a shift of the demand curve. So initially we'd have the market demand. Now if demand increased, remember this is increasing at each and every price, from 10 at $4 to 20 at $4, from 5 at $5 to 15 at $5, then we would get an increase in demand. Increase at each and every price. An increase in demand means more of a good will be demanded at each price, and that's key. An increase in demand means that more of the good will be demanded at each price. It's reflected in the supply schedule, demand schedule, and that is in turn shown in the demand curve, that shift of the demand curve there.